You know, as a kid growing up in New York, I wasn't really, I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I wasn't sure as a little kid what that meant. I mean, I didn't distinguish between playwrights and television writers and film writers. My fantasy of what a writer is somebody who sits in a room and writes novels. And so I guess I grew up wanting to be a fiction writer. And it was only in my later teens that I became enamored of theater and began to gravitate towards playwriting, and that road took me ultimately to, you know, film and primarily television.
And what, I mean, that was initially the start, but what continues to inspire you?
Bills. No.
That's always a good motivator.
No, you know, I think what continues to inspire any writer is ideas. I think if your ideas desert you, if you run out of ideas, you essentially stop writing from your heart, and you kind of write to order. You know, you become some version of a hack. And when I use the word hack, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. I simply define a hack, which I have been for you know, off and on throughout my career, as anybody who makes a living as a writer is at times, is someone who writes for money. You know, you do have obligations, you have family, you take an assignment, you're passionate, but you bring skill, and you bring craft, and you bring a work ethic to the task at hand, and that's a noble effort. But I think inspiration isn't really about that. I think inspiration really is about locating some interior sense of theme. First and foremost, I think always a story, because I think if you don't tell a good story, if you don't tell an entertaining story, any grand thematic notions you may have, you know, are moved, goes by the boards, because it's not in the service of a good, compelling story. But the best stories, the most inspired stories, are stories which ask provocative questions. And oh, somebody sat on the duck there. Sorry, we've all done it, don't worry. You know, when I was a young writer, a younger writer, I used to feel a real compulsion to answer the question. And what I discovered over time is that in one's rush to answer questions, one doesn't begin to see the importance of asking the question. And the best storytelling, I think, is the storytelling that simply asks the best questions in a way that causes a reader, a viewer, a thinker to go off after the fact and wonder about, you know, the questions you pose creatively. So I think as long as you're alive and you're plugged into the world and the way in which the world continues to change, you begin to discover the infinite variety of ways in which you can ask the same question, and the same question has a different relevance in 2003 than it may have had in 1983. And so if you look at the world you live in, you stay current with the world you live in, those questions continue to inspire storytelling. So I think that's why I'm still doing what I do.